Hey there, and welcome to Undoing We, Divorce and Life Conversations on WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network, radio, podcast, and TV. I'm your host, Mardi Winder-Adams. I'm a divorce coach, a mediator, and someone who's been through exactly what you're going through. This show is all about helping you get through the tough stuff, the overwhelm of divorce, the what now moments, and the messiness of trying to rebuild your life. We're going to talk about real life challenges, share expert advice, and give you practical tools you can use to move forward with your life. Are you ready to start shifting from we to me? Grab a coffee, sit back, and let's get started. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Undoing We. Today, I'm going to talk to a true pioneer in the field of high conflict divorce cases. And I'm going to share with you a conversation I had with Lisa Johnson. And Lisa is author of the amazing book, Been There, Got Out. She wrote it with her business and life partner, Chris Berry. And it is an amazing book because it talks about the issue of high conflict divorces from both a male and a female perspective. Although we hear a lot about women going through narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships and high conflict divorces, the same thing can also happen for men. I mean, these behavioral issues or these mental health disorders, whatever you want to call them, are not specific to one gender or another. So today we have our conversation that we had a few months ago spans over a lot of different subjects. So we start out talking about what is a high conflict divorce. We go into some of the experiences that you may have with high conflict divorce and how these toxic individuals can use the court systems as a weapon against us. So we talk a lot about legal abuse. And then we also share some information about some of the things that are being changed and some of the focuses that are going on in the legal community, the family law community, to help address this very real issue of legal abuse, but also of how these individuals quite often are enabled through their legal representation to continue on with these ongoing frivolous lawsuits. Lisa's experience was actually going through her own high conflict divorce. And then, even though she had created a really good co-parenting plan, which is typically one of the main reasons why the toxic partner is able to keep dragging the partner back into court years after the divorce is over, Lisa had actually created a very good co-parenting plan. So there wasn't much to do with that. Her issues in dealing with her ex were more about the financial issues. In other words, things were offered in the divorce or things were agreed upon in the divorce and he wasn't following through on them. So that was what her case for going back and forth to court. And I believe that she went back to court some 90 times after her divorce was finalized. So one of the things that I want to focus on in talking about this is that getting through the divorce with a high conflict individual, and I do not use the term narcissistic individual because most of these people are not diagnosed and it's irrelevant to the court. I'm sorry to say that, but at this point in time in our state of law, the idea of whether somebody is a narcissist or whether they are, whether they have one of those cluster B personality disorders, it really doesn't matter unless they are diagnosed and unless that diagnosis causes some kind of concern for the safety and welfare of the spouse or the children. That's really the only time that this becomes a factor, which I'm not saying I agree with. I'm saying that's the state of the family court system at this point in time. So Lisa and I have a very wide-ranging conversation, but it really just touches on some of the big issues that either men or women divorcing a high conflict individual need to be aware of during the divorce and even into the post-divorce life. So I hope this provides some insight and some just some general information. We will be doing more specific stuff on different strategies that you can use with these high conflict individuals as we work through future episodes. So I hope that's something you're interested in. I'd love to hear if it is. Put it in the chat or send me an email, get in touch with me. Let me know if there's any topics you want to hear. But before we get into that, let's take a few minutes and just listen to my past conversation with Lisa Johnson. And let's just see what comes out, and we'll discuss it on the other side.
It's not really a final decision. There can
Part
be,
one.
as you've said, there can be. Now, the vast majority of people who are divorcing emotionally healthy individuals who are able to say, okay, this is it, we're done. They don't have to deal with this, but there is that, I don't know what the percentage is, but I'm guessing it's probably somewhere between 15 and 20, because that's the number of cases that end up going to court, right? So that's the number of people that are going to be problematic to deal with. And, these can be extended, not so much. Now, did you have children involved? Was that a lot of your post-divorce legal issues?
No, well, so most of my post-divorce was financial.
Okay.
But that is because I had such an excellent attorney that my children were very protected through the divorce process. I had an airtight parenting plan. I understood what I was doing. And so my children were protected. So I was really lucky, because most of our clients who come to us are dealing with custody battles more than anything.
Right. And custody battles are a whole different level because it's so emotional. And a lot of times I'm going to call them the abusive partner that's abusing the system, that's abusing the the kids. And I'm not necessarily talking physical here, but putting your kids through this is abuse. I don't care who you are and what you say. If they're unfounded, multiple trips back to court, that is abuse of children. And I am so frustrated that family court judges just don't shut this stuff down, because they do have the power to do that. Is that not correct?
Yes. I mean, one of the hardest things to get, and we've interviewed so many attorneys about this as well, is enforcement on court orders. So in the state that I live in now, Connecticut, when a judge gives an order, they don't give a deadline. And so when there's no deadline, 15% of people who don't follow that law don't follow it. And then the burden is then on us, people like me, who have to keep returning to court, and you can't even file for contempt if you don't have a deadline.
Right.
So I'm a very strong advocate for deadlines and consequences. And because my case got split, part of it moved to New York State as well as Connecticut. I kept stressing, because New York needs deadlines and consequences.
Yes.
So I said to my Connecticut judge, look, in order to get enforcement in New York, because that's where my ex lived, and I thought it would somehow be easier, that was before COVID hit, I need a deadline and consequence from you to get a money judgment so that they can proceed. And I was able to get that, but it's like, why wouldn't a judge give a deadline and a consequence? And the last couple times I was in court in Connecticut, I made very clear to the judge, I focused on the pattern of my ex's behavior of not complying with court orders. And I said, in order for me to get anywhere, I need orders with teeth, and I need a deadline and a consequence, and it needs to be severe. And we've been waiting so many years for this. Right. So the court has already seen what's happened, and the judge went above and beyond for me and gave a very strong order with more than I could have imagined. And that was what finally turned things around for me. 9 years.
Well, I'm sorry you went through that, but I'm also glad you did, because now you're able to use that experience to help like hundreds of people that are dealing with this. One of the things that I know is your area of passion in helping people is legal abuse. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, and who are the people that perpetrate legal abuse?
Okay. So like I said, I didn't know anything about any of this years ago, especially when I got out of my marriage. But several years post-judgment, still dealing with an ex in court who still would not comply with the court order, I kept thinking, why is my situation so different? I'm already divorced, and I'm the only person I know who's still in court. And so I found this old judge's manual from Washington State, which talked about something called legal abuse, which had not been publicized on social media at the time. And so I had never heard of it. And I read about it, and I was like, this is my life. Like, this is my life, and I think I need to, I bet there's other people out there. So my partner, Chris, and I, with Been There, Got Out, we decided to start something called a legal abuse support group just to see what would happen. And I thought, if we get 2 people, because our clients are all over the world, if we get 2 people, it'll be worth it. And then we'll see what happens from there. Well, that first week we got 12 people, including from other countries. And I thought, we're onto something. So I'm going to niche down to legal abuse. And as we started talking to more people and interviewing like organizations such as DV Leap, which is a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., they said in America alone, approximately 80,000 people are dealing with legal abuse. And I was like, wow. And so I really started focusing on producing content that was about legal abuse, and see that even though the laws are different, it's the same issues everywhere.
And it's
so
state by state. Yeah.
Yeah, but legal abuse is basically where one party, well, Chris and I often say, like, when in an abusive relationship, when you separate, the abuser is limited to 3 ways to still get at you: money, kids, and the court system. And money and the court system go hand in hand. So one thing I learned, to sum up legal abuse, and then I'll go into a little more detail, is that when that person weaponizes the legal system to wear you down and bleed you dry financially. So they do it by trying to control, harass, intimidate, coerce, and impoverish you. And so there's 2 basic ways that it happens. So one way is something called vexatious litigation or frivolous litigation. And we see that a lot with our clients, where their exes are constantly threatening to bring them back to court. If you don't do this, I'm going to file for full custody. I'm going to take away, the child support. I'm going to do all kinds of things, so that people live in this constant sense of dread of, like, if I'm not perfect, if I don't do what this other person wants, I'm going to be taken back to court. And so it's a terrible way to live. And because these cases go on for years and years, especially after the divorce, it's just like you already had PTSD from the relationship. And now it's like every little ding, every little email, like something from the court, just like, oh my gosh. And I remember myself like opening the mailbox to be like, that dread, like, what's the next thing? Like, what's going to happen? Just always feeling like I'm going to be back in court again, and I'm going to have to spend all this time. And I have been back in court again. So living like that. The other side of vexatious or frivolous litigation is when somebody does not comply with a court order. And that's been my situation. So my lawyer called it. He said, be prepared for it. And I had no idea it would take this long. But this made the burden go on me, or someone else whose ex is not complying with a court order, to return to court to compel them to obey the agreement or the court order. So both of those situations require lots of time and money and energy. And being pro se, I can't get legal fees back, but legal fees are very hard to get awarded. I did use attorneys, what's called limited scope. Like when I moved part of my case to the other state, people were like, just get an attorney already. I'd been pro se in Connecticut for a while and was doing well, but it was like, I need enforcement, I need punishment. And so I used a couple of attorneys, but I found that they didn't help at all. And then it ended up just costing money. I didn't get the full amount back. I got most of it, but it was just like, nobody knows this case better than me. And nobody cares as much as I do. So I went back to being pro se, and that's when I finally did much better. But that's basically legal abuse, like weaponizing the system. So it's also called litigation abuse, paper abuse, because of all of the wasted paper and motions filed, and judicial terrorism, or my favorite is stalking through the court, because they still have that access to you because you have to keep going back to court.
Right.
So people dealing with legal abuse, and this was my life for years and years, often feel a sense of rage, injustice, and despair. Like every single night, I would have insomnia. I would wake up in the morning, and for a moment I'd be okay. And then I'd be like, oh, like this is so not right. Like the very system that we turn to for relief ends up making things so much worse. Yeah. And there's so much trauma associated with having to go back to court and deal with an abusive person and deal with the system that's just not making things happen as quickly or at all that should happen. And so there's that should, like, how can this be possible? And people who don't live with legal abuse or don't intimately know someone who does have no idea
Yeah.
And they'll say things like, well, why doesn't the judge just do that? And it just makes you angry because you're like, I don't know why.
Well, and the thing that I was going to say is, and this is where I really think the legal profession needs to step up and start policing its own members, because the only way that kind of abuse can continue is if there's an attorney that is willfully participating in these frivolous suits, and they are well aware that they are doing it. And the legal profession is getting better. Like I was just actually at I'm in Texas, and I was just recently at a mediation conference where there was a lot of attorneys. And one of the things that's starting here in the state is a movement of concerned attorneys who are it's going to be sort of like a grievance board, that people who are facing this abuse can go to this grievance board and actually start a grievance against these attorneys that are so maliciously using the legal system. Because let's face it, it's making them a ton of bucks to be able to do this. And Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but typically the people that engage in legal abuse have the kind of money that if they spend a couple of $100,000 in legal fees a year, it's not that big of a deal for them, because they've either got the income or they got the assets, or like you say, they're writing it off, right? They're getting it back some way, or they're using it in some way to their advantage. So do you see that there's any kind of a movement? Because I'm sure you're dealing with people all across.
So two things. Okay, first of all, in terms of having like rich people being the ones who abuse legally, yes, but there's also people who go pro se like me, because they're like, like people who aren't working or don't have the time, they'll be like, you know what? I'm just going to tie up everyone and the system by wasting time and money and energy. And so they can also be harmful because like say our client's ex is pro se, that person will call our client's attorney or send lots of emails and things. And so our client is paying the lawyer to read that stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's like pro se can go both ways. Okay. And then what was the second thing you asked? I just
groups of attorneys actually stepping up, or bar associations. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm really glad we actually recently went to a conference as well in Nashville for something called the Amicable Divorce Network.
Yes.
Which we joined, which was like, we were the only high conflict people there, because all of our clients are extremely high conflict, not our clients, but their exes are. And so the reason that Amicable Divorce Network even started was because the attorneys got tired of working with, I can't say the language, but you can imagine. They just said the level of civility has gotten so low, especially in family court, that they're like, we don't want to deal with it. And the reason we went to that conference too and joined Amicable Divorce Network is because we were interested in meeting professionals, not just attorneys, but mediators, GALs, parenting coordinators, who could put a fence around legal abuse and keep our clients out of court. If you can try to get things done outside of court, clients have more power in a lot of ways, and professionals are trained to deal with personality disorders and difficult situations.
I hope that conversation gave you some insight into some of the challenges and some of the issues that individuals, whether they're men or women, who are divorcing a high conflict individual are often facing during the divorce and in their post-divorce life. Lisa is such an expert in helping individuals who have completed their divorce decree process and are now looking at 1 or 2 or 3 or 10s or 20 times of returning to court, or having to deal with motions being filed and having to deal with all the legal complications when you're just thinking, oh my gosh, why can't this be over? The highlight of our conversation, I think, was sharing what constitutes a toxic divorce and how we need to be our own advocates when we're going through this process, when we know we are in a relationship with a high conflict or toxic individual. It is a mistake to assume that a high conflict person is suddenly going to see the light and be reasonable going through the divorce. If anything, and I write about this a lot, if anything, they are likely to become more difficult, more challenging, because they are losing control. And if you read anything, and I am going to use the word here, if you read anything about the narcissistic relationship and how narcissistic abuse occurs and how narcissists behave during the divorce process, you will understand that they are going to cling on to that narcissistic supply or that individual that is molded, that they have molded over the years of their relationship to provide them with just what they need. This is not to say that you are to blame for anything. Unfortunately, a lot of people, by the time they're in these relationships, it's kind of like, you're going to hear this a lot when you hear people talking about these toxic relationships. It's sort of like that, putting the frog in the hot water and then gradually turning up the heat, and the frog will never jump out because it doesn't even realize that the water's getting hotter. We know that this is true. We know that people don't choose to get into these relationships, but we do know that there is typically some history of codependency, and that the narcissist preys on that, or the toxic person preys on that, and then continues to undermine your self-confidence, self-worth, and your feelings of being able to be in control of your life. And when you finally get the courage to step out of this relationship and go for the divorce, a lot of times people tell me, I feel like I've been re-traumatized by the legal system because nobody listens to me. They think the toxic partner is the charming individual and I am the crazy one. That's the exact words of some of my clients. And this should not be happening. That was my little rant in the middle of that conversation, that I really do believe that these toxic individuals are able to find, a lot of times, they are able to find legal representation that supports their bad behavior. And let's face it, it is a money-making income for some attorneys to get involved in these highly conflictual or highly conflicted relationships and divorces. There are some great attorneys out there. And I do believe that an attorney is an absolutely essential part of everybody's divorce. And the few bad apples are making it really, really awkward for the really good attorneys that are out there working in the best interests of their clients and the children in the divorce relationships. So it is important to find the right divorce attorney. We're going to do a whole episode coming up on how to assess your divorce professionals if you are in one of these toxic relationships. So make sure that you listen in for that one. But I do want to stress that being prepared and recognizing that if you are divorcing a high conflict individual, that you need to make sure that your attorney and your divorce team is on board with that, and that they are going to create those ironclad, or those, as much as they can be ironclad, those really comprehensive and very clear and very precise co-parenting plans and financial arrangements in your divorce. There should be no ambiguity. There should be no wiggle room. There should be no areas where it's open to interpretation. Professionals who have worked with high conflict divorces are going to be able to help you get that kind of language in there that will help you in limiting the amount of time that the other person can keep bringing you back to court, whether that is through working with an attorney, or like Lisa says, a lot of these people just take it upon themselves to do it pro se on their own because they have the time, and that's where they get their enjoyment and satisfaction, is from continuing to re-engage with you through the legal system. I hope that this shared a little bit of insight into high conflict divorce, legal abuse, and some strategies that you can use to recognize that you're in this situation, and a great resource to reach out to if you need some help. Again, her name was Lisa Johnson, and her program is Been There, Got Out. All the information on Lisa's services will be in the show notes. Thanks for sharing your time with me on Undoing We. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to share it with a friend, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you're looking for some more support, be sure to grab my guide, 5 Strategies for Better Communication During Divorce and Other Life Transitions. The link is going to be in the show notes. And remember, no matter what you do today, do something special for yourself, because you